right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you all for coming today. My name is Jaci McDole. I am the Executive Director for Copyright and Creativity with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Global Innovation Policy Center. It's a really long and fancy way of saying I work with the content industries. But it's my pleasure to be up here today with Albhy and with Terry. If you haven't checked out their bios, I'm not going to read them, but they are very much incredible. So check them out and talk to them afterwards. But yeah, we're talking about AI and copyright today. And I'm going to take a quick step back because I don't know who all knows as much about this stuff as the nerds up here on the stage, including myself. So for those who don't know a ton about copyright, there's really only two requirements for it. Original works of authorship. So originality is a key thing. For those who are in patents, it's similar to novelty, but not quite. And then the other aspect is that it has to be fixed to a tangible medium. And a lot of people think of copyright as just music or movies or books or things like that, but there's so much more that can go into it. Being near Ohio State, if any of you saw the absolutely amazing marching band show a few years ago where they did the Michael Jackson show, that stuff can actually be copyrighted. So yes, I'm that much of a nerd. So that's kind of what we're getting into today. And so I'm going to stop talking now and kick it over to Albhy for some introductory remarks, and then we'll kick it over to Terry.
So I have kind of a mixed background, and maybe I should have been here yesterday so we could have fixed the audio in this room because it's really pretty diabolical. I was a record producer for 20 years, so I'm a musician, and I wrote music, conducted orchestras, engineered records. But I became a musician because when I was in university studying engineering, it was too much fun to play music. So I also have an engineering background, and I have, I guess, about a dozen issued patents. So I straddle the areas of creativity in the arts and creativity in technology and rights of all kinds. And the main point that I would make about copyright or about the creative arts and AI is that you have two different kinds of rights. In a film, you have the actors and you have the behind the scenes, the creators, particularly the writers. In music, you have songwriters and you have performers. There is the idea of protecting your persona. Some people call it a right of publicity. That's what Universal Music Group calls it. But the idea that I can't pretend to be Taylor Swift and she can sue me about it, but she has notoriety and visibility. I don't have to pretend to be a writer to write a movie or a film or to write a book or to write a song. I can be anonymous. Those people are anonymous. They really have no protection. And I'm not sure that AI is not going to displace a lot of those. I would say that today, if I need somebody to create background music for a car ad on a local TV station, I'm not calling a composer. I'm writing it with AI. And I think a lot of the sort of the yo people's jobs to be done will be replaced by AI. And so for me, on IP for copyright, whether it's books or music, I heard a woman speak recently who interviewed someone on a Times Daily show. She interviewed a woman who had written something like 200 romance novels in the last year, was making a ton of money. She just wrote them all with AI. And so I think AI separates the creative process into those who are visible and those who are invisible. We can talk more about that later. But at any rate, that's my background and my 30-second starting point.
All right. Well, thank you all. I'm Terry Hart. I thought I'd start just by giving you an idea where I'm coming from on this issue. So I'm the general counsel at the Association of American Publishers. We represent publishers as an industry on matters of law and policy. And there's roughly 3 sectors that our membership includes. So we represent the trade publishers, which is what you might think of with book publishers, like general audience, fiction and nonfiction. We also represent educational publishers who produce textbooks and more digital learning materials. And then we also represent scientific and scholarly publishers who publish journals and articles reporting on research in all types of fields. So the one thing they have in common when it comes to AI, and I should disclaim I'm speaking today in my personal capacity, so please don't attribute anything I say to my employer or my members. The one thing they all have in common when it comes to AI is that the work that they invest in and produce is incredibly valuable for training large language models. It's by and large long form, professionally written, professionally edited, textual work that AI companies find very valuable for training. And the other thing that they've discovered and learned over the last couple of years is that many of the large foundational models have gone ahead and trained their models on these works without asking permission or compensating them. So I want to start there and with the topic of copyrights and AI, start with kind of a caveat that I don't want my remarks to be taken as a suggestion that copyright is the be-all and end-all of regulation for AI, or the only thing that we should be thinking about when it comes to AI and the risks and the possible effects it'll have on employment, on labor, and everything else there. But I also want to make sure, where I'm coming from, that I do think it is a necessary part of any workable solution. And we leave a gap if we ignore the question of copyright when it comes to AI training. So when I hear people ask about how creators should be compensated for AI training, I often hear, this instinct to jump to complex, very new, novel regulatory systems. But I think we already have a very simple, well-established option. And that is if you have one party, like a publisher who has something valuable to another party, and they want to use it, they could sit down and make a deal, right? This is licensing. This is something that has been a part of the creative industries for a long time. They've operated with licensing. They operate at scale with licensing. And I think that should be the starting point when it comes to AI training with copyrighted materials. So I do want to emphasize in these introductory remarks what I think are some of the practical realities about licensing that are relevant. And first, and especially when we're talking about licensing in a new area like AI training, pricing, how much publishers or creators should charge, how much AI model developers should expect to spend, that's going to be very uncertain when you're starting with a new market, and that's fine. That's one of the roles of the market, is to discover pricing information. And over time and over repeated deals, you'll get more and more information about how the respective parties value that and how pricing should be set. So even though it may be very uncertain now, it'll get more and more certain over time. The second thing I want to emphasize is we're not looking at a one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to licensing. You can have different pricing models. You could have maybe upfront fees, revenue share type arrangements, usage-based pricing, or some kind of a combination of that. Depending on the type of data and the use case, you can structure deals, depending, again, on the type of works that you're using or the type of uses that model developers want to use. And you could have that different tiers for the same type of data. So, you have a lot of built-in flexibility. And then finally, it's not just about money. Right? Licenses can also be a forum for the parties to discuss guardrails, to allocate risks, to define permitted and prohibited uses, and also potentially cover adjacent rights like publicity and trademark, which may also be embodied within the works that are being used for training. And then finally, licensing is also a good way to handle global use. Right? AI models are not going to be territorial. They're going to be deployed across jurisdictions and borders, and licensing can be structured to address these international rights and compliance in a coordinated way. So I want to next jump real quickly to why I think licensing is not just good for copyright owners, but also for AI model developers. And there's a number of reasons that I'm thinking of. So one is when you have data and you're able to put a value on it and treat it as a property right, then there's incentives to improve that data, right? There's incentives to clean it and label it, to curate it, to maintain it, and make it more appropriate and more effective and more usable for AI training. It also supports future supply. I mean, this is really near and dear to my heart, but the idea of copyright in general is that it provides incentives to produce and create new creative works. And so if those copyright owners are able to get a return on those works through licensing, that will enable them to continue to create the next generation of works. And I think AI model developers are not just training once, they're going to want to continue training. They're going to want a good supply of new creative works that'll be used for training the models of tomorrow. So let me just end by saying, there's a lot of friction in the marketplace. There's a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace now. But I think with licensing and with stable rights and using the market, that friction is not going to last. It's going to get more efficient over time. We're going to see intermediaries emerge. There's going to be aggregators and marketplaces. There's going to be collective licensing solutions that'll help reduce the transaction costs and standardize terms. So that's my pitch for licensing and why I think it has a lot of benefits that the alternatives, like, say, across the board fair use or maybe some type of compulsory licenses, it has a lot of advantages over those in terms of flexibility, certainty, the ability to evolve, and also the ability to support the creators and publishers like my members that are part of the value chain of AI to begin with. So.
Well, thank you both very much. A lot of great information there for sure. We will get into the deep dive into the licensing issue here in just a minute, but I want to kind of back up again real quick. I like cliches, so apologies. There's the old cliche of there's nothing new under the sun. And in a lot of respects, that kind of applies here. I think sometimes the challenge that, especially in the content industries, what we face is the concept of AI and defining AI. Because I think a lot of times people really are talking about generative AI. But it kind of gets all encompassing because in a lot of respects, variations of AI have been around since at least the 1960s, been used especially in the content industries in a lot of various ways, which also takes us up to the early 2000s, which, if anybody remembers anything that happened with particularly the music industry around the early 2000s, we had a lot of issues with digital piracy and technological changes, and there was a lot of friction there. So my question is, what lessons from the digital piracy era are most relevant for AI today, and what is fundamentally different?
Well, I guess digital piracy, you sort of leapt into my domain. So the issue with digital piracy was, hi out there. We had this misconception in the music industry that people cared about quality, and they never did. They always cared about convenience. So mp3.com was absolutely an opportunity to say, hey, we're just going to get music to anybody. They can get it there. This bandwidth is coming to everyone. I actually met with the Seans from Napster, Sean Fanning and Sean Parker and John Hummer, who was their investor. And I spoke to them and I said, they said, well, we'd like to take a license so that we can use all of your music. I was at Universal Music Group at the time. And I said, well, how much will you pay? And they said, well, we'll pay a penny a song. And I said, will you pay the publishing? They say, no, you have to pay the publishing. Well, turns out the publishing rate is in the United States, a statutory rate. It's a penny rate. And then it was about 8 cents a song. So they were asking us with a straight face to say, we'll license you our songs, we'll let you give them away to people, and you'll pay us a penny per download, which is what the mechanical license represents, and we'll make up the extra 7 cents. So there have always been disruptions, and ultimately that was undone by streaming, which chained it out and became a new business. The inflection points keep changing, but I think that this inflection point is much bigger than even that one was. I think that we now have, we were talking about this upstairs. The music industry changed over time because people had access. 50 years ago, I was lucky enough that I could get piano lessons as a kid and learn to play an instrument and have access to other musicians and do this. Some kid growing up in Pakistan, most of them did not have an opportunity. Now you have musicians from all around the world, from all backgrounds. I can learn to play an instrument over the internet. I can make a recording on my phone. It's no longer gate kept. And I think the same thing happens with everything. AI means that there was a woman, I forget her name, who was signed a $3 million deal, does not sing or play an instrument. She's a poet. She got a record deal because she used AI to create this music. So it is the creative vision that turned out to be the value. And in some ways, we're removing the friction from the creative idea to the result that goes to the consumer. But you were asking about, we just asked about how it's
similar, how it's different.
Well, yeah. So this is similar in many ways, but I think that the copyright question is always a blurred line, to use a pun. There was a copyright case around the song "Blurred Lines," which was claiming that the song infringed Marvin Gaye's copyright because it felt similar, and I think that was overturned, but only partially overturned. And so the question is, how much of AI is new and how much is different? So as a songwriter, I've been around a lot of great songwriters. Barry Gibb used to look through a fake book to sort of steal lyric ideas as an idea for a song. Islands in the Stream was written based on, he didn't come up with the original phrase Islands in the Stream, but he did write the song. And so no one would ever say that a songwriter using a thesaurus is cheating or doing something that they don't own the copyright. And so there's this very fuzzy line between I used a thesaurus and I just said, create me a song that sounds like Otis Redding and Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, which is obviously not creative and not copyrightable. And so I don't know where these lines go. And I think that they're not fine. They're very blurred.
So the question is, what lessons we could learn from digital piracy here. So I think, I kind of looking at this from an industry perspective, I think there are a lot of parallels. One thing that jumps out to me is as new as the challenges were in digital piracy, as new as the challenges are in AI, I think fundamentally for copyright owners, it's important to remember that the new technologies don't change the underlying principles of copyright. So just trying to keep that in mind about, there is value in creating these works, and there is value in recognizing marketable rights in them as the building blocks to make not just creativity possible, but to make it possible to have a livelihood in creativity and make it possible to invest in that and get more and better creativity. So remembering those kind of underlying principles don't change, even if the technology and the way people access works and experience works and use works, that may change dramatically, but the underlying principles, I think, don't. And that sometimes gets lost. I know, during the digital piracy age, there was plenty of talk about, copyright's over. The music industry is over. This is just, it's fundamentally changed the world, and we'll figure out how to keep making music, or people will still want to keep making music, and we'll figure out how to make a livelihood on that. So I think that's one lesson that I would learn. The other lesson, I think, the more difficult one is that even with copyright, even with enforcement, there is still a need to be proactively making sure that the business models are adapting to the new reality, right? The record labels couldn't sit back and say, we're going to just keep selling CDs, hope this goes away, hope people don't think that the way to access music is to do it through on-demand streaming, an enormous catalog, and hope that just kind of goes away, because that's where the market went. That's where the demand went. And if the industry didn't meet the demand where it was happening, then there wouldn't be an industry. And so I think that's true with AI too. And it could be very painful, right? This is, for some in the industry, like, this isn't something they've licensed before. They don't have the workflows for it. They don't have the vocabulary inside to say, well, how do we license to OpenAI to tokenize our entire catalog and train a model, right? And they have existing contracts too. I mean, this was also the case with digital piracy. You have a catalog, decades worth of contracts that were written before digital streaming, before digital downloading was even a thing, and they're either silent on that or they're ambiguous. They could be read either way. Maybe you could fit it in one category of royalties or another category of royalties. So it's very painful for not just to kind of get that infrastructure in a place where you could be active in this market, but also to settle, there's a tension between both sides of the contracts. Like, obviously, the artists or the publishers who sign the contract will either want to have, say, the contract said we retain those rights, or if we didn't, they're at a very, very favorable royalty rate. Whereas, I think on the publisher side, the label side, they'll be saying the opposite. Either, no, we got those rights, or if we got those rights, it's at a lower royalty level. So that's not something that I don't think a lot of people would willingly want to go through. But I think it's necessary because, again, this is a technology. There is a demand for copyrighted works, and if the industry doesn't meet that demand, it's not going to go away. It may just mean that they're left out of it, or they're left out of being able to play a role in it.
Yeah, and there are definitely going to be incentives on both sides. We've heard a lot earlier about the benefits of closed systems and things like that. But there's also something to be said about systems that are trained on, for better or worse, the entirety of human knowledge in many respects. So what would licensed training mean for both creators and for developers in many respects?
Well, I mean, I think as a creator, the assumption that I would make initially is that opt-in is a better place to start than opt-out. So if you want to train on my song, then I can give you the right to do that. The difficulty with that is that you have unbalanced leverage. So record labels like the major labels did deals with Spotify. Those deals were not balanced. The deals were set up in such a way that they got stock, which didn't filter down to the creators. They've recently been doing deals with the AI companies. And this is me as a composer. I have not opted in. No one has said at Universal Publishing that in order for an AI like ChatGPT to be trained on my song, I have to opt in. I'm saying, as Universal Music Group, you can't get opt-in from all these millions of people, so I will be a proxy for everybody. And so the result will be that I will get shares of stock or values in some other way that positively impacts the company, but does not necessarily impact positively the individual writers. And my concern with all of this is that AI exacerbates not only income inequality, but financial inequality around the world. So you have a tool that could enable anybody to write a song or to perform it or have access to the world. And yet, in fact, the way that it's being utilized is exacerbating the differences. And one of the problems with AI that is the same as the problem with the internet is it always averages to the mean. It always goes to, if you ask a question, you will get the answer that most people are looking for, not necessarily the answer that you're looking for. And the creative arts are based on being away from the mean, on thinking of things that nobody else has thought of. And I have high hopes that these things will continue to survive and continue to grow out. But people seem to be satisfied by a lot of regular stuff. And so if I have a Spotify playlist that I like and it's being made up 90% now by AI generated slop and I don't know it, maybe I don't care, or maybe I do. And so I personally care, but maybe most listeners don't. Sorry if I digressed. By the way, I think anybody who feels like they have a question or want to ask something should, don't stand on ceremony.
So I think when I think about it, there's sort of the abstract in the minds of the copyright owner, the abstract value from licensing for training, right? It's a valuable input to AI developers, and so I think copyright owners deserve to be able to get that value because they created it and it's useful to the AI developers. And that's obviously helpful. It's a new revenue stream. It helps support future creativity and it helps reward the creativity that's already been done. But I think in a lot of the minds of copyright owners, like they're thinking more about, well, what are the potential harms from outputs of these models? And I think they all kind of view that harms through the own lens of what type of work they're producing, and it's going to vary, right? So if you're an educational publisher, you're probably most concerned about something that's been trained on your works and can spit out answer keys or study guides or other types of derivative works that you're otherwise already creating along with textbooks and digital learning materials. And so you're worried that an AI model developer could train on your works and then become your competitor. Whereas if you're, say, a big name author, a best-selling author, David Baldacci is a best-selling author who testified last summer in a Senate IP subcommittee hearing on this. And he said he was most devastated when his son showed him ChatGPT or one of these models. And basically the prompt was, write me a novel in the style of David Baldacci. And here, as any of you know, it pretty easily spits something out. And he could recognize it, because it was trained on his novels. It recognized, kind of what elements were associated with his writing, and he recognized like, oh, here's something that could replace me. So for them, that's kind of the most immediate and obvious harm.
One of the tests in copy education.
Yeah.
Value of that.
Yeah. Yes. And then similarly, if you're maybe less well known, but maybe you're a mid-list writer, maybe you're a genre writer, like in the romance novel, you're probably most concerned about the fact that a model can spit out tons of romance novels that are maybe not, they're not infringing on your work or your style, but they're definitely flooding the market that you're trying to engage in. And it's difficult for you as a human author to find your audience when someone could go on Amazon and see thousands of AI-generated novels in that genre. So that's probably the harm you're thinking about. And I think, it's kind of unfair to say, well, an AI model developer could train on your work to create something that's going to compete with you. Like you're essentially asking the author to subsidize your own competition, right? It's not the same. It's not, in my mind, the same as another human basically learning the genre and writing. That's to me, that's expected. That's the competition you would expect. It becomes different in my mind when a model has trained on the work to create something to compete with it. They've copied, they've reproduced it, they've implicated the exclusive rights of copyright to create something that will displace your works and your future works. And there's just a sense of unfairness to it.
Yeah. So there's over 100 very different copyright cases, copyright and AI cases right now. Some have been consolidated, some have been settled in all various forms and things like that. And they all have a whole wide range of arguments from both sides. One of the most common that you'll probably hear, though, is fair use, which is a legal defense, which is what Albhy and Terry are both talking about. I don't think you could hear what Albhy was saying, but we were talking about fair use, and there's 4 factors that go along with that, which is the purpose or character of use is the first one. A lot of times you'll hear people say transformative use that goes along with that aspect of it. There's the nature of the original copyrighted work, the amount or the substantiality of the portion that's taken, and then one of the most prominent, which is one that came up with both of them, was the potential effect on the market. So that could be personal, based on competing with yourself in some respects. It could be flooding the market, and there's a whole bunch of different variations of it. But that we're kind of getting into the fair use discussion of it in certain respects. Did you want to add something to that? Or?
Yeah, I just want to say something about the market, and that is markets change kind of no matter what you do. There used to be an encyclopedia business, and I think the textbook business has been massively implicated by professors saying, go to Wikipedia and get this data, and it's free, and here it is. And one could say, I certainly think Wikipedia is better than Britannica was. It certainly is one of the few things that still seems to be curated carefully, and where they take a lot of care in making sure that it is accurate. But I think that things change and they go on. And so talking about the economics of it is one piece, and the economics may shift. Universal Music stopped making money selling CDs, and before that, they stopped making money selling vinyl discs. Businesses change. The one thing that we didn't discuss, because no one here is from the film industry, but I worked for Sony Corp for about 16 years. The people who are visible will be protected. Nobody is taking, any of the superstar actors that we know's job. You know who they are. But the writers, the original creative process is now very much impacted by AI. I don't know if any of you have seen them, but there are, if you no longer used to create a storyboard that if you wanted to sell a movie, you would create a spec script, and then they would maybe spend some money, $100,000 to create a rough version of what it might look like. Now people do that with a prompt in AI. I have seen, AI sizzle reels that look like a professionally produced film. It's so a lot of the creative process is being changed. And although I know we would all like to hold on to copyright, and for me, the biggest issue, and I'm going to digress here, but I'm sorry, but I have to. The biggest issue is about the quality of human life. And so for me, I was a musician because I loved playing music. People like to create. The creative process is brilliant and life-fulfilling and wonderful. And the idea that the creative works, whether they're books or songs or movies, is about the commercial success of how many people watch it, is, for me, a red herring. And I think if we get into a great world, then people can create. And if you can use AI to create something where you didn't have the skills, that's wonderful. But the process of creating and enjoying other people's creations, to me, is what this is all about, and what I don't want AI to take away.
Did you want to add anything before we take questions?
No, I would just echo that. I think there's, we as humans value human creativity. We value human communication, and I think we always will. And a lot in publishing is the experience of hearing what another person said, hearing their views. It's not always necessarily about just the words on the page. It's the fact that it's coming from a human that makes it valuable and that makes it something that we want. And so I think, yeah, there will always be a place for human created things. And I think it's something worth protecting. So yeah, I would agree on that. And I did just want to add on your point on markets changing, and definitely agree with that. But I just want to kind of dive a little bit deeper and make a finer distinction there about and how copyright comes into that. So if you're Wikipedia or the many, like the community of contributors that did that, and you are creating a online encyclopedia, and the effect of that is that this is more comprehensive, more up to date, more covers more topics, and that puts Encyclopedia Britannica out of business. Like, them's the breaks. Like, that's how markets work, right? Where copyright comes in is when you are using someone else's work as the starting point, as the foundation. And that's where fair use comes in. And if you look at the history of fair use, I mean, there has been a lot of emphasis on the fairness of it, right? There are certain things, and this is not how the law approaches it, but the general narrative is that there are certain things you could do with a work that are fair, right? You're able to build off of works. We know that knowledge is cumulative, that it's iterative. Creativity is cumulative and iterative. It's not, you're not kind of springing from scratch. And so there are certain things you can do with works that are fair, but then there's a line where it becomes unfair. And so that's kind of at a very high level what courts are trying to do with fair use, is saying, okay, we know AI has used these works. Is it fair? Is it fair that they're able to build these incredibly commercially successful models off of this that compete with the original authors and creators, and not have to pay them or get any permission for them? And that's kind of the overall thing, is it fair or is it unfair?
Okay.
One of the difficulties with AI is it tends toward the mean. No AI in the world would have created the Beatles in 1960 before they came out. So humans have the ability, and I don't know whether or not AI will change and be smarter, and they may be able to replicate human thought and emotions and all sorts of things in the future. But as of right now, the real creative leaps come from people who think outside the box, and AI sort of by definition is in the box.
Very, very true. I am keenly aware that we are standing between you and lunch. So if anybody has a question, I think we got time for one.
I have a question about for the publishing industry. Like, I understand the concerns about AI, but just getting back to the talk earlier about the 5% versus the 95%, like, are there ways that the publishing industry is using AI, predicting bestsellers, or, the process of the editing process takes a very long time to bring a book to market? I'm just curious if there are positives that the industry is seeing, specifically in book publishing. I'm curious.
Yeah, I could speak only kind of at a high level generality, but I would be surprised if there are publishers that are not using AI or thinking about using AI currently. So I think, in the trade space, in the trade publishing space, I understand, they're looking at the use of AI for internal workflows, to find efficiencies, and make the process, like marketing or things like that, more efficient, more effective. Where the tension arises, especially because for a trade book author, they're very, very protective of their authors, or for a trade book publisher, sorry, they're very, not just protective of their authors, but they also recognize like they're nothing without their authors. And so, they are deeply sensitive to what their authors are telling them, because if an author doesn't like what a publisher is doing, they're going to leave. And there's a lot of voices from the author community that are very opposed to using AI for any sort of editorial or the actual writing or editing part of the publishing business. And so, you do see stories where there's been suggestions or allegations that a particular publisher may have used AI to create a cover or to create a translation or something. So, I think those are kind of where, just looking at the technology, you might think that's where it's being deployed, but there I think is some reluctance for a lot of trade publishers to do it for the kind of editorial uses, but in terms of business processes, marketing, that kind of stuff, I think they're all looking at that and examining it. And certainly, in the educational space, in the scientific and scholarly space, a lot of the publishers in the scientific space, I mean, we represent everyone from the individual nonprofit society for, anesthesiology or some, specific field that puts out like one journal a year, all the way up to like the big global publishers that are not just putting out journals, but have their own research and data products. So they've long been using their own works and other works with technological tools. So AI is kind of just a natural progression. And so there's a lot of developing their own AI tools or developing their own AI processes to supplement and augment the type of work that they're doing.
All right. One sentence takeaway. What do they need to know?
I don't know. Fasten your seatbelts.
Yeah. I guess my takeaway is going back to, you said there's 100 lawsuits in the US. We're very much at the beginning of seeing what courts are going to do. To the extent there have been a couple early decisions, I think those are very early decisions and not the final word. So yeah, we're like, 2 or 3 years out before even seeing how courts are going to be treating this issue.
So I have one other takeaway, and that is that I think that we should provide accountability for provenance. Consumers really like knowing that something was created by a human and there's a human connection with that. And we need some sort of framework where we can actually determine that something was created by a human being. And maybe the copyright law will end up figuring out how to refine that. But for now, I want to know that there's a real person singing and a real person who wrote that song and a real actor acting that part and not just a bunch of slop. And that's how I connect to those people, the creators.
Well, thank you both so very much. Please join me in thanking Albhy and Terry. They'll hear it in a minute.